So, Mike, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I'm very excited to have this conversation. It's been such a long time coming.
Thanks so much for having me. And I've been looking forward to it. I know that two of my co-founders, Dave and Ed, really enjoyed the session with you. So I'm looking forward to it.
And it's really nice to have, I know I've also been interviewed once or twice. And as someone who, I think you can relate to this, as someone who does a podcast, it's always nice to have the tables turned and be the subject as opposed to the person asking the question. So I hope I can give you that experience today as well.
It's so awesome because I don't have to think, right? I can just answer the questions. So,
Exactly.
So I'm really enjoying it already.
Cool. So before we dive into our main conversation, I always start with a few rapid fire icebreaker questions that you haven't been able to prep for. They're really just to loosen up and get to know you a bit better. So don't think about them too much. Just sort of answer what comes to mind. I can almost guess how you're going to answer this one, but after a really tiring day, how do you spend your evening?
So that sounds like every day, right? And my answer is not going to be what you're looking for. And I'll tell you why, because right now it's 7 p.m. and I'm in Australia, and I will be on calls to my team until probably 9 p.m. So the way that I spend my evenings is on calls to my team in Cape Town. But to honor the question, after that I have a rule that I don't look at a screen for an hour before I go to bed. Cool. I'll do a meditation most nights, and I'll read a book, and usually a fantasy or a fiction type of book.
Nice, proper disconnect and unplugging.
I try.
And then tea or coffee, and how do you take it?
Yeah, so I am absolutely ADD and hyperactive and all those things. So I have one coffee a day. If I have two, it's not good for me. The way that I drink coffee is I have almond milk flat whites, double shot. Nice. And then for the rest of the day, I drink tea. And I absolutely love licorice tea, just black. It's my best thing.
Amazing. I'm going to try that, actually. That sounds good. And then what is a really good work-related book that you have read recently?
I'm reading for probably the fifth time, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. You've probably heard of it. Your listeners have probably heard of it. If you haven't heard of it, read it again. It's an FBI negotiator teaching negotiating lessons. It's just absolute gold.
Amazing. I think, yeah, that's a good shelf book to have in hard copy and
totally.
on hand.
Totally.
And then what is something you wish existed but doesn't?
Oh, you caught me off guard here. What is something I wish existed but doesn't? This is maybe quite a serious thing, but the ability, something that allowed us to truly get rid of single-use plastic, like actually dispose of it in a way that it's gone and not in a bad way. I don't know why that's super front of mind at the moment. I'm not someone that generally preaches about this stuff, but it's just super front of mind for some reason. I just wish that could exist, that we could actually get rid of plastic in a way that it's gone.
Nice.
In a not bad way.
Yeah. Because there is a way we can get rid of it. It's just not very good.
It's not very good. Yeah, exactly.
But cool. And then what is something you're glad that you said no to recently, and why?
Yeah, so this is quite a share. So I'm part of the Entrepreneurs Organization, EO, as it's commonly known, and I'm on the board in Adelaide, which is it's an honor, and it's a privilege, and I'm stepping down at the end of this financial year. I get huge amounts from it, and I learn from it, and it's massively valuable. But I'm deciding to focus on a very small number of things this year, and that feeling of saying no to something that doesn't fit in that very narrow focus is something I'm not used to. So it's not that I'm happy to be stepping off the board. I'm just sort of happy with myself that I've had the discipline to step off things that I like that don't necessarily serve my immediate focuses, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then last question, what is a thing that cost you less than, and I'm trying to do some currency exchange now. I have it as 1,000 Rand.
Divided by 10.
Cool.
Close enough. $100.
Let's go for $100. That was the best investment most recently, and why?
Under $100. It's quite hard to buy things for under $100 these days. So I'm trying to think about this. I have a 5-year-old daughter and she's awesome and she's very intense. And I recently bought the third set of Uno cards, and every set of Uno cards that I've bought, I just get so much mileage from them playing Uno with my 5-year-old daughter, who beats me, I might add. And that's about $10. That's like $100. So
Yeah.
I think that's probably the biggest like amount of value that I've gotten for something that didn't cost a lot of money.
Very, very cool. Thank you for answering those so candidly. It's really interesting to get some insight. Some of those questions are very interesting. Cool, so thanks. Cool. So I'm going to start with a little bit of context just to catch people up and then dive into the first question. But generally speaking, so you've been leading a team remotely even before lockdown. As you said, you're in Australia, but it went into overdrive, when COVID-19 first hit. And I think, post-pandemic, in any case, remote is more topical now than it ever has been. And something you mentioned last time we spoke, which is sort of the basis for this conversation, was this realization that many people are still struggling and fail to realize that remote work and remote leadership are not the same thing, and that remote leadership requires quite a different approach as a leader in order to actually get remote leadership right. So we're going to dive into that approach in a sec, but just before we do, could you tell me a bit about how your team is sort of set up and how it's distributed, even before COVID-19 and now currently as well?
Yeah, sure. So like many tech businesses, I think we're lucky in that we're very well suited to this kind of work in terms of getting the work done. Mm-hmm. So I'm guessing most of the listeners can relate to what I'm saying. Provided you have good internet and we'll get to this, I guess, but good leadership and good communication flows and good direction and vision, it's actually easier, I would argue, to get the work done remotely. And we'll get to that a bit later. So The way that our team is set up is we're about 30 people. We have a very big leadership team for such a small business. So there's 5 people on the leadership team, soon to be 6. And that's important and relevant to something that I'll share a bit later.
Cool.
And most of the team spends most of their time in Cape Town. So I'm in Australia, in Adelaide. Just to paint the picture, that means I'm 8.5 hours ahead of South Africa. Most of the team is in and around Cape Town. We've got one person in Joburg. We've got one person in he always gets cross with me because it's not Amsterdam. It's somewhere just outside Amsterdam, but in Europe. And that's how we currently set up. So that's what it looks like now. Before COVID, we were still largely remote, but that was a little different. So that was where we ran a sort of process or a system called remote second, which was just a bit of a stab at remote first, because and I'm sure we'll get to this a bit later, but long story short, we figured out that remote is actually not the best way to do things. Remote second is the best way to do things. So what that means in English is, when you can be together, but set up your business in such a way that it doesn't require you to be together. So before COVID, what that looked like is we had a beautiful big office in Woodstock with all the tech things you would expect, and exposed brick walls and a beer fridge and all the usuals.
Very Woodstock.
But you didn't have to go. Yeah, exactly. You didn't have to go in. So you only had to go in, I think it was one every 10 days for dedicated learning days. A lot of people chose to go in, but you didn't have to go in. Mm-hmm. So we had been experimenting with the remote stuff for a while. So yeah, that's what we looked like before. And at that point, I would say that, I don't know, I would guess probably 8 to 10 people went into the office every day, and the rest worked from home and came in every now and then.
Yeah.
And then obviously when lockdown happened, then obviously everyone was fully remote, but it wasn't a difficult transition, which we can speak to a bit later.
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot that we're going to touch on now, but tell me more about this realization that you had of like remote work, remote leadership, and leadership how we knew it before not being the same thing. Like, what do you mean that remote work and remote leadership are not the same?
Yeah, so most businesses will say this, but we're very proud of our culture, and I think a lot of our success that we have experienced has been because of a culture that we have allowed to develop. So I don't want to say that we've created, but we've allowed a space in which this culture could develop. Where you are physically located is a massive part of your culture. Well, traditionally, the whole world is experiencing other things right now, but the physical location and the physical proximity is a massive part of your culture. And taking that away very suddenly has a very negative effect on culture. It has a negative effect on human psychology, on mental health. I mean, we're all feeling this around the world, right? So when we first started experimenting with this, we did it voluntarily, right? So the first time we experimented with this was a long time before COVID, where we said, okay, everybody can work from home. It was a voluntary thing. And the observations, there were many observations, but one of the main ones after a time was that the work got done. In fact, I would argue the work got done more effectively and more efficiently. But we couldn't quite put our finger on it. But over time, things just didn't feel as close. We didn't feel as close. The culture didn't feel as strong, and we couldn't quite figure out what it was. And what became quite evident to me was working is quite easy remotely, like getting stuff done, giving tasks, sharing tasks, giving updates, giving feedback, having meetings about things that need to get done. But nurturing a culture and continuing to set and nurture a vision and nurture the values and nurture human connections, that is really, really difficult to do remotely. To continually inspire and lead a group of people and have other people leading other groups of people. And wherever you are in your business, you have some form of leadership and some form of that. It just becomes really, really difficult because it's difficult to connect with people over tech. I mean, this is all like the whole world knows what I'm talking about now, but a couple of years ago, we were like experiencing this and going like, who can we talk to about this? Like no one's doing this.
Yeah.
And I went down this rabbit hole of like reading everything I could on remote work. I read all of Jason Fried's stuff Freed from Basecamp. I read like My Year Without Pants, the Automatic Guys. I read like everything I could. And I figured out that none of these guys are talking about remote leadership. They're all talking about remote work. This is how you get stuff done. This is how you do a stand-up. This is how you, and I'm like, that's cool, but that's not actually my role in the business. I don't need to help people get stuff done.
Yeah.
People are generally quite autonomous and people are generally quite sort of self-directed, but I need to lead. I need to keep people like connected, inspired, going towards the vision, living the values. How the hell do I do that remotely? And, I felt like we were failing. And it just became really stark to me that like, I'm going to have to figure this out because I don't know if anyone has. Like, I'm going to have to figure it out on the fly. Obviously, fast forward to COVID, we're all trying to figure it out now. Everybody's in the same boat now. It's not just us and a handful of companies trying to do this.
But was there a moment? Was there a moment when you realized that really, like as starkly? Was there a situation with your team where you were like, "Oh wow, remote leadership is really hard"?
No, I don't think there was a moment, but I think there was an observation in our sort of LBT, as we call it, our leadership team, where it was kind of like, "Geez, guys, it just doesn't feel that like close at the moment. Like what's going on with our culture?" And it was just this like observation of like, it's not like it usually is. And then we were like, oh wow, okay, that's because of this remote thing. Now it sounds really obvious because everyone in the world is experiencing what I'm talking about. But I don't remember the exact moment, but I do remember that catalyzing me realizing, okay, wait, the way that I lead in this business, I've got to change. I've got to start experimenting and I've got to start changing and I've got to figure out what are the levers I can pull? What are the things I need to stop doing? What are the things I need to do differently in order to try and close this gap? And that's been a journey that I've been on since then.
Yeah. Why is that important to you as a leader?
I mean, that's all your role is as a leader, right? Is to set the vision, to bring people along the ride with you, and to steal from an awesome friend of mine and guest that I had on the podcast, Paul Galades. He shared what one of his mentors shared with him. And he said, you only have two jobs as a CEO. One is to set the vision and bring people along with you. The other one is to make sure you're never the smartest person in the room. Now, the second one is pretty easy for me to do because I work with people far, far smarter than myself. But the first one is really my main role, right? My main role is to like, hey, this is where we're going. This is how we're going to get there. We're going to figure this all out together. And then I've got to beat that drum and I've got to set that and I've got to make sure we're always moving towards that. And with the help of an excellent team, that's what I've got to do. And I had to keep doing that, but it just became really difficult. So why it's important to me is if I'm not able to lead, then what is my role in the business, right? Because I'm not needed in my business to get the work done.
Yeah.
Right. I don't get involved in production. I don't have much skill in that area of the business.
Yeah.
So it dawned on me that leading by example is just really, really difficult when nobody's watching. When nobody can see you, do you lead by example, right? Well, you don't. So you've got to start figuring out ways to permeate and inspire and connect in other ways. And we're not even a big business. We're 30 odd people. I can still connect with every single person in the business. When you're 200, 300 people, I don't even know how you do this effectively. I just don't know how you do it.
Yeah, I guess, that's a whole nother conversation, is scaling leadership, but scaling leadership remotely. I think that's another, thing that everyone's still trying to figure out.
Yeah.
So, you were talking about that you've realized you had to change some of the things that you were doing, but just at a high level, we'll obviously go into some of those practical approaches just now, but what did that require from you as a leader? Like, what did this move to adjusting your leadership style to fit a remote team better? What did that require from you?
Yeah, so the single biggest learning that I had is, it's going to be quite vague, but I will happily go into some very specific examples to show what that looks like. But
please,
I sort of realized that I need to communicate at least 3 times more than I thought I had to. So what I mean by that is, when I thought I was communicating enough, I realized that I've got to triple that amount of communication to actually be doing it enough. So like, when I was sitting there going, these guys are going to be so sick and tired of me giving them another update or reaching out to somebody again, or that was my thinking. Like, they're going to be like, oh my God, Mike, just leave me alone. What I was hearing back was actually, hey, it would be great if we could hear more from you. Hey, it would be great if we could have more check-ins. Hey, it would be great if we could get more updates. And I was going, are you serious? Like, I feel like I'm spending all day just connecting with people. I feel like I'm too much in your face. And yet the feedback is, hey, you're a little bit distant. Can we get some more of this time? And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. So the number one thing that I learned is, just in a leadership position, when you think you're communicating enough in a fully remote team, triple it, and you're probably about there. And I'll go into what that looks like, because that just sounds like a very sweeping statement. So I'll talk you through a bunch of things, and you're welcome to pick on any of them if you want to go deeper, but I'll just sort of run through my week. So on a Monday, and remember, I'm in Adelaide, which is 8.5 hours ahead, right? So there are some logistics challenges around this. So on a Monday, I will send a maximum 5-minute video to the whole team. It'll be a WhatsApp video or a Slack video. It's a selfie video, and it's basically just sharing what my intentions are and focuses are for the week, any notable meetings that I'm having for the week, things that I've learned or observations that I've had for the week that's just finished, content I'm consuming, and anything else that I might want to share. And it's really just quick. It's really just, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm learning. This is what I'm sharing. These are the interesting people that I'm meeting. And I just blast it off every Monday, right? And I always welcome feedback. I'm always saying, hey, contact me if you want to talk about that thing, or if you want to challenge this thing, just get in touch, right? I got to be honest, I don't think everyone watches it. That doesn't really matter. Just having the option of watching it is valuable to people. And I constantly ask people if it's valuable.
Right.
That's a Monday, right? Every day I have a huddle with my leadership team, and so after this call, I've got what we call occasional comms. Occasional comms meetings I try to set them every 2 weeks. I generally don't get that. I don't generally get that right, but I try. That's really a session that is kind of open to any topic. So this topic today, for example, is something that we're going through in the business, and I will invite the whole business. So anybody's welcome to come. It's an hour, and it's basically just a discussion about a thing. So it's like, hey, we're considering this thing, or we're doing this thing. Let's have a conversation, ask questions. There's no boundaries. Let's just talk, right? That I try and do as often as possible. I try and do one-on-ones with every single person once a quarter. I usually get that right. I don't always get that right. This quarter I've been pretty terrible for some specific reasons. But that one-on-one session is not just a random catch-up. It's not a retro. It's not a review. What it is it's about 28 questions that I've stolen from awesome places around the world, and some of them I've come up by myself. I generally don't talk. I generally just ask these questions. And it's really just to get a proper sense of where the person is, what they're battling with, what they're not battling with. I don't try and solve any problems. I ask them about the business vision. I ask them about what's going on in their life, in their world, where they're stuck, where they're not. But there's no intention here to solve things. It's just to connect with people. And I find that really good stuff comes out of that. I then schedule one-on-ones outside of that when people want to do that maybe more frequently. And so the list goes on, all the way up to our quarterly planning sessions, which take place over 7 days now, remotely for 3 hours a day with the leadership team, where we go through the quarter or the year. We set the objectives for the year. We review budgets, all of those sorts of things. I'm going to stop there because hopefully that like paints the picture that like a lot of my time is actually spent connecting, right? And still, I got to be honest with you, one of the most common feedbacks I get, one of the questions I ask my team is, how can I be a better leader? I ask every single person that question. And one of the most common things I get is, we just, I don't know how, Mike, but it would be so great if we could connect more with you. So even though I'm doing all of this stuff, it's still the most common comment is like, I don't know how, but it would be so great if there was just more connection. Right. So it shows me that like, you just got to keep on connecting, keep on pulling that communication out of people and giving the communication as much as you can, because especially in a small business, if you're making decisions and that affect the company, you've got to be sharing what's influencing you in the leadership team, where you're getting this information from. Like, why are you making these decisions to change this or focus on that or stop focusing on this? So that'll give you a sense of what I mean by communicate more than you think. Right. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, because it's often uncomfortable. And, throw into the mix a time zone, it gets really tricky. So just to paint the picture, it's 7:30 p.m. where I am right now, which means it's probably, what is it? It's like 10, what's the time there? 10 a.m. It's like, it's the morning, right? So 11ish, yeah. So my energy cycles are such that I'm super high energy in the morning and super creative in the morning. But by the time it gets to 3, 4 in the afternoon, I'm in like my worst like energy slump. I'm grumpy. I'm not creative. And now my team wakes up. So now I've got like 3 or 4 or 5 hours of meetings at the worst part of my like energy day. So now I've also got to manage that, right? Because I've got to show up, right? So there's a whole lot of these really insidious little things. And then sometimes you've got a client that's in the US, but your team's in South Africa and now you're in Australia, and you've got to navigate these morning, night, midnight. There's a lot of work that goes into this. And that's why I say remote leadership is not the same as remote work. It's not about doing the things. It's about finding ways to connect with people beyond just tasks and checkups.
So I have some questions about the actual cadences you follow. But just before I dive into that, I want to pull on a thread you just mentioned, because I think that's really interesting. How do you show up? Because I think this is an interesting, and probably has like a two sides to the equation, because you can either set yourself up so that you have like a run just before your first meeting at 3 o'clock, so that you get to the meetings and you show up when your team wakes up with a lot of energy, or you can just be very open and honest about how you're feeling, and don't try and force yourself into a very energetic mind frame, because there's a case to be made for showing up very vulnerably as well. So like how do you set up your day to make sure that you showing up at that time, and in your case it's like an 8-hour difference, but I think remote leadership is in even if there's no time difference, you still have to show up in some way for your team when you engage with them. So how do you think about that?
Great question. And I think it absolutely, just to reiterate something you said, like it is so important as a human, but like especially as a leader, because there's all these stereotypes and expectations, and most of them are bullshit, but they're there to just be like this strong thing, right? And that's fine, but no one in the world is always strong. Like it's just not real, right? So I think that balance is so important. And just before I answer your question, I introduce a lot of the stuff into our offsites and our leadership team meetings, where like it used to be called Mike's hippie bullshit. Like I used to start with the stuff and all my team members would be like, Mike's hippie bullshit. And now years later, they all want more of Mike's hippie bullshit, because it's hard and it's vulnerable. But you know what? It leads to very deep levels of trust in a team, and it leads to the good stuff. So to answer your question, it's been a journey. It's been a hell of a journey, because one of the things that I struggled with the most is actually just overworking, being in a different time zone. So I generally get up quite early. So let's say I'm up at 5 or 6 in the morning. Now, South Africa's asleep, but I'm still working. I'm doing all the stuff that I need to do, right? So I'm working now from, let's say, I don't know, anywhere from 5, 6, 7 in the morning. This is how it used to be, until my team wakes up at 3, 4 in the afternoon. Then I've got like 4, 5, 6 hours of calls. So now it's like 9, 10 p.m. Then it's like, oh, I'll just do a bit more work. And now it's like 11, 12 p.m. And then it's like go to bed at like 12, 1 and up at 5 again. And then that's just this. I mean, that is not healthy, right? You cannot sustain that. And that's what I was doing. What it looks like now through many, many iterations. I'm a very big believer in meditation. I absolutely love the Wim Hof breathing method and cold immersions. I train very hard in terms of cycling and various things, mainly cycling. So what I do now is I carve out sections of my day in the morning, and I specifically do not work. So it's kind of like I kind of think of it as like a mini retreat every single day. So instead of working my ass off for whatever, 12 weeks and then taking a week off, I'm like, no, that doesn't make sense. Let me try and build this into my day every day, right? That's usually in the morning-ish, and it'll usually consist of some meditation, usually some training. Maybe I'll just go with my laptop to a coffee shop and not do work, but do other stuff that I like doing. I might go for a walk. I often go for a walk. I love walking in nature. And then I do a whole bunch of work, but specifically around how I show up. What I've realized works very well for me is to like almost reset my body, right? And the way that I do that is I'll generally do, let's say my first call is usually at the moment with daylight savings, it's usually 4:30 p.m. So between like 2:30 and 4:30, that's when I'll usually train. So that's when I'll usually go for an hour and a half, very high intensity ride, like mountain bike. Then I'll come back and we've got a pool here. The water's usually pretty cold. I'll jump in the pool, even if it's freezing. And I literally mean freezing. It's often below zero here in winter.
There's the Wim Hof
cold
method.
water immersion. I'll do a meditation. That's the Wim Hof method. Absolutely. I'll do a meditation. I'll do 1 to 4 rounds of Wim Hof breathing. And that process allows me to kind of reset. And it's not quite like waking up again in the morning, but it's definitely a kind of a shift in my mental state. And then I show up.
Yeah.
That's only part of it. Like, okay, so that's the process part of it. That's the part where you're like, how do you do it so you show up? That's cool. Yeah. The other part of it is at the beginning of our daily huddle, we have a 1-word opener, right? And that 1-word opener is, how do I feel right now? And I'm not always honest about it. Like sometimes I just say fine, or, maybe I might say I'm feeling something positive when I'm actually feeling negative. But I'm not scared of saying something negative. I'm not scared of saying like I'm feeling really anxious, or I'm feeling really ambivalent, or I'm feeling trepidatious, or any of these things, because it's important to give your team that temperature gauge of where you're at as a human, right? Because no one can be great all the time. Yeah. Then the next part of our daily huddle is, what am I grateful for today? Right. And so we go. And then other things we include in our daily huddle are things like, what is a behavior I want to keep from the last 24 hours? And what is a behavior I want to drop from the last 24 hours? Yeah. And if I'm saying stuff like, I want to drop the behavior of, I don't know, worry, if I'm saying that every day, it'll give my team a sense of like, hey, Mike's obviously not in a great place. Maybe there's something we should do to talk to him about this, or find out what it is he's worried about, and me to my other team members. So it's quite a journey, and it's quite an iterative process, and I'll change it all the time. I'll change it based on seasons. Sometimes I'm disciplined, sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I don't do anything at all, and then I'm shit. And like, but it's, the point is like, there's a pretty serious level of effort that's actually required in order to show up properly for your team. And I'm always working on that, because it helps me as a person as well, right? Because it's good for my routine, it's good for my health, it's good for my own everything, which then manifests through my efficacy at NONA, at work.
So I just want to, and I think this is important to clarify, be interested to hear your thoughts. But I think, you said earlier that leading by example is really hard because people don't get to see you. But I think a lot of people sort of interpret lead by example as always be, your best, always be great, always, be this iconic leader, etc. And I think what's interesting is that this reset is a really nice, you framed it really nicely. So thanks for the sort of practicality there. But I think what's cool is you're not doing that necessarily to show up like energetic and, super excited about it. You're doing it so that you can show up like honestly, like you've done this reset, you know where you are. And it's easier for you to say, hey, I'm having a bad day, as opposed to having worked 8 hours prior and just being grumpy and irritated, and like makes it way harder to show up authentically. At least you can, be there with a clearer mind. And as you said, your 1 word or however else you express those things, that you can actually show up authentically, not necessarily show up
absolutely,
positively, which is, as we can't all be positive all the time. It just doesn't work. So I think that's really,
no, it doesn't. And I think it's also important that, it's really important that, not that it's easy, but there's a couple of sort of things that I'd like to share. And one is, conflict is not a bad thing, right? Mm-hmm. Like teams that work at a very high performance level need conflict. It's very healthy. I think something that I've learned through experience is the thing that is like the flag for me of when conflict is healthy and conflict is unhealthy is when it gets personal. So, when there's conflict and things start getting personal, that's like a massive red flag. Like, this is no longer healthy. This has become toxic. This is not good. Right. But when conflict is kind of, I always call it like fighting or arguing in the same direction. I actually think that's pretty good. It's not always pleasant. It's not enjoyable. You might still get really angry. You might still get hurt. You might sort of leave and be pissed off for days on end. But in my experience, when you're fighting and arguing and pulling in the same direction, you're actually building relationships. And by showing vulnerability around that, you're really building relationships. So like when there's been a blow up, to go back and say, okay, right, here's where I think I was totally out of line, or here's where I think I was X, but this is the part that I can't sort of concede on, or what have you, like stepping into your authentic space, right? And that is really, really difficult to do. Like, it's really difficult to do. And all of these sort of processes and exercises and things that we bring in to the rituals, I guess, of at least the leadership team, if not the entire business, they're largely based around building high performance, high trust teams. Because when you've got high performance and high trust and accountability, like skills, they're not as important, right? Like, they're easier to learn, and we've got super smart, amazing people that we can draw on all the time. So that part of leadership and that part of running a business is so important. And I think it's finally sort of getting more accepted in the business space, because I think even 5 years ago or 10 years ago, it was like, no, Mike, that stuff doesn't belong in a business. That belongs in a yoga studio or a meditation class, or like it's separate. And like, it's totally not. Like, where it's needed most is in like the commercial world, like where there's just heavy ego, super masculine stereotypes, like, all these things. That's where it's required, right? And it's been so cool to watch like our transformation, because just the Mike's hippie bullshit thing, like, it's kind of funny, but it's kind of powerful. Whereas like, I ask these questions of our leadership team that are super awkward and super difficult. And like, and initially they were like, Mike, what are you doing? Why aren't we talking about the budget? And why aren't we talking about, and I'm like, no, just stay with me here, guys, not knowing if it's actually going to work. And fast forward a couple of years, it's like, hey, we need more of that, because that's the kumbaya stuff. That's the stuff that brings us together. That's the stuff that lays the foundation that allows us to get through the difficult times, because there's always difficult times. So, and again, that stuff's difficult to do from the other side of the world over a Zoom call. It's much easier to do when you're sitting in a house overlooking the sea, having a glass of wine. That's easy. Like, to do it over a screen is a very difficult thing, and it requires a lot of attention, a lot of listening, and a lot of care.
Just before I go back to the cadences, just to make sure I'm understanding this, because this conflict, this thing you mentioned about conflict is really interesting, that it's healthy to have conflict when it's healthy conflict. But how does that tie into remote leadership? Like, how does that fit into that idea or this conversation?
Yeah, very, very, very badly. Like, it doesn't fit well at all, right? It's a huge challenge, and it's a good question. And I'll kind of tell you what I mean. Like, when you have a significant conflict over a Zoom call in a high trust team, in a low trust team, it's going to be even worse. But in a high trust team, it's extremely difficult to come back from that. It's extremely difficult to reconcile. So like, picture the scene. You've got 6 or 7 people on a call, and there's a disagreement between 2 or 3 of the people. It gets pretty like intense and heated, and not disrespectful, like not personal, but intense, and people are upset. And when you're together physically, you can walk outside, and I don't know, if you smoke, you can have a cigarette. Or once I got really angry and I just went for a run for 5Ks. I just need to run, and I just ran for 5Ks and came back. And you can do stuff, right? You can go outside and swear about the guy and then come back in, or do whatever you need to do. When you're on a Zoom call, what do you do? Like what do you do? How do you reconcile? Well, you don't. Like, you generally just don't. You just kind of end the call. Everyone's angry. You haven't actually come back at all. You haven't had it out. And now you've got to come back the next day or whatever, and you've got to get back into it. And that's really, really difficult, right? So I haven't figured that out, to be honest. I haven't figured out, and I don't know if I can figure out, like, how to reconcile that in the moment. After the fact, it's a bit different. And maybe that's the wisdom, right? Maybe the wisdom is wait until, give it some time, sleep on it or whatever. So it's a good question, because it's a hell of a challenge. Like when that conflict arises in such a way that it's not going to get sorted out in that call, it's very, very difficult to reconcile, where it might not be so difficult to do that in a physical setting.
Yeah. What has your approach been to make sure that it doesn't get personal? Like, is it the kinds of questions you ask? Is it the sort of the steps you take? How do you, I mean, I'm sure there's part of it is having those relationships built up, because then it's easier to connect with someone because you can trust that it's not personal. But is there like a communication tip that you have for healthy conflict?
So I will share a tip that's helped me. But before I do, I think our focus has been working very hard on building a high trust team, which is an ongoing thing. You know, there's a great book called 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which is incredible in this regard. There's some really good books out there that can help, and of course facilitators and things. And I think it's incredibly important that we build high trust teams. But you're still going to have conflict, and you're still going to get through that point where it's comfortable. There's a great book called Crucial Conversations. And the one thing that I took out of that book, which it's kind of like Never Split the Difference. It's a kind of book I have actually got it on my bookshelf, but it's something you refer back to. But the one thing that I always remember from the book is find your common purpose, right, in the moment. So when it's happening. And if you can do that, I just find you kind of bring yourself down. So it's like you're in conflict, you're disagreeing about something. In our case, 9 times out of 10, we're actually not disagreeing. It's just like we're just coming at it from different angles. And if I can hold myself and go, okay, hold on, Mike, like what's the common purpose? Like I know that we agree on where we want to take the business. I know we are in this together. I know that this person is not being personal with me. What's the common purpose? Find the common purpose. Assume positive intention.
Yeah.
That is a massive hack if you have the self-awareness to do that.
Yeah.
Don't tell someone else to do it, right? That's not something you tell someone to do. That's something you do yourself, right?
Yeah.
So that's a tool that you can use that's actually very effective in the moment.
Yeah.
Just ask yourself that question, like, what is our common purpose here?
Yeah.
And by the way, if you can't answer that question, there's probably a bigger problem.
Yeah.
It's kind of an indicator.
Yeah.
But in terms of your question of like, what's the approach to doing this? It's just constantly working on a high trust environment all the time, so that people feel A, safe to voice their opinions, B, safe to voice their disagreement with everybody, and C, enough experience to see that even though there might be conflict, that so many times you've gotten through the conflict and it's generally resulted in a better outcome.
Yeah.
And then I've also got to sort of speak about the underbelly, right? Like sometimes you don't, and then someone has to leave.
Yeah.
That's the harsh reality here. I don't want to make this sound as if it's like always sorted. It's not. People have left our business.
Yeah.
Maybe one day I leave our business. Like it doesn't always get solved. I want to be really clear about that. But when that's happened, I can think about it, and the chances are there wasn't a common purpose, and the chances are there was personal, it was personal, right?
Yeah.
If I think back to these things, I'll probably be able to trace that. So I want to also just share that, in that I'm not trying to pretend that everything ends well. Sometimes it's just a bad fit and somebody needs to leave.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good little caveat or disclaimer there to include. Just before we sort of close the loop on some of the stuff you said, there's 2 questions that I had about the cadences you mentioned earlier. The one was about the one-on-ones, and the other's more of a general. So I'll start with the one-on-ones. I think you said they're quarterly. Does that mean you do them once a quarter? So that's interesting to me, because I've heard a lot of people do weekly one-on-ones. Why have you gone for the quarterly one-on-ones as opposed to more regular?
So again, just to reiterate, this is a one-on-one just with me, right?
Yes.
And there are 30 odd people in the business, which means I then have to set 30 meetings every quarter,
right,
just for this. And it's usually about an hour each. To answer your question specifically, why don't I do them weekly? In my opinion, weekly is way too frequent, because the questions I ask are not things that are going to change week to week. Cool. They're things that are going to change maybe month to month, not even always quarter to quarter. Quite often I'll get a response saying, Mike, it's exactly what I told you last quarter.
Yep.
So this particular type of meeting is I don't think it's appropriate at all for week to week. I'm not saying weekly one-on-ones aren't appropriate.
Yeah.
This particular weekly one-on-one. I also just want to reiterate, that's just my meeting cadence.
Yes.
So Ed, who's the COO, he has his own meeting rhythm, which is probably far more frequent. There's also weekly leadership meetings. So we meet as a leadership team every week for 2 hours. There's a whole bunch of other meeting rhythms that are going on. That particular one is quarterly. And as I said, it's more of a check-in and it's a check-in for me to see how the individual is doing and what they're like, how they're faring. But it's also an opportunity for me to revisit the values, or revisit the vision or the direction, or revisit the goals, or revisit our purpose, or those sorts of things. So it's an opportunity for me to repeat these things over and over again, because not to derail, but vision, purpose, values, mission, these things don't get written on a board once and then they're in your business. Your job as a leader is you got to repeat these things over and over and over and over again all the time, until they're either corrected so that they become appropriate, or until they're adopted and become real. So it's a two-way thing. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's why it's quarterly. And then I've also just got to be honest. There's just no ways in hell I would ever be able to do 30 meetings a week with. I could just never do that.
Yeah, no, and I think this ties into my next question really nicely, because I think, and I'm gonna paraphrase sort of the conversation we've had as a whole, and then get your thoughts on it. But I think, leaders might see this idea of over communicate, and they're like, I post to Slack once a week. Maybe I should post to Slack 10 times a week, or I do one-on-ones every month. Maybe I should do one-on-ones every week. It's what it seems like you're doing. It's not necessarily doing more of one particular kind of communication. You've got like quite a variety of ways that you connect with people. It's your selfie videos on a Monday, the occasional comms, the Mike Sippy bullshit, the one-on-ones every quarter, the one words in the huddles, what else did you, like the feedback. I thought that was interesting as well. You also get people to communicate with you and return. So it seems like that you've intentionally, or maybe not intentionally, but you have picked like a variety of ways that you communicate and sort of tackle connection, remote leadership from many different angles.
Absolutely. Because people are different, right? So, an example of this, just to illustrate the point, is, as I've mentioned a few times, I love exercise and outdoors, right? So I'm always on my mountain bike or running or whatever. And a couple of years ago, what I started to do was on our social, we have a WhatsApp social channel, which is pretty busy, which I love because you don't have to be on it. It's opt-in, but it's busy. There's good banter. If you're a sensitive person, you probably won't enjoy it, but it's super funny. And I just started doing something on my early morning rides, like with sunrise or whatever, just saying good morning, Nona, and then just having a picture. And it would be rides. And I realized that most people, maybe they don't care about riding. So then if I was doing push-ups in my living room with my daughter sitting on my back harassing me, I'd ask my wife to take a photo and say, to take a quick photo, it'd be good morning, Nona. If I was, and it caught on. And the next thing, this dude was going to the gym for the first time. And that girl was suddenly getting her personal best 5K runs and saying, good morning, Nona. And not everyone responded to that. I think some people have probably never even don't care about it, and that's totally fine. But to some people, that's a big deal for them, And I've had a couple of people say, Mike, please post more of that, because it actually really motivates me seeing you riding in the dark on a trail. It makes me feel like, wow, that's awesome. I'm going to do that. Other people don't care at all. Similarly, Slack will, appeal to other people. Similarly, some people will like the videos. Similarly, some people will rock up to our occasional comms. And, people are not the same. So I think you have to have a totally varied way of connecting with people. I mean, what does me sending a picture of me riding on a mountain bike trail have to do with leading a software development business? Well, seemingly nothing, right? But we're just people, and connecting with people is what we need to do. So if I can connect with 3 out of 30 by sending those photos, I'm going to do it. And then I got to figure out a way to connect with the other 3 that have no interest in any of the things I'm interested in. But I've got to figure that out. Is it through parenting that we're both parents? No. Okay. Is it through... And so it goes, and so it goes, and so it goes. So absolutely, I think a mistake that a lot of leaders make is that they try to reach a wide range of people in the way that they would like to be reached. Yeah. But I'm not trying to reach me, right? I'm trying to reach other people that are not necessarily the same as me. So there's got to be a varied approach. It is more work, but it's kind of fun as well. It doesn't always have to be super serious. It's just got to be reaching out and connecting with people. So yeah, absolutely. It's very diverse. It's very wide. I'm always trying new things. And look, I want to be really clear about this. Like we haven't solved this, right? Sure. Like not even by any stretch of imagination. It's just, I feel like we might have had a bit more time to experiment with this stuff than the rest of the world because we just started it a bit earlier voluntarily, where now the whole world is in it and they're going, shit, how do we do this? You know, people are unhappy. How do I reach people? They're unhappy and I don't know why they're unhappy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just feel quite privileged that we've had like maybe an extra couple of years to grapple with these problems.
Yeah. It just struck me as interesting that remote leadership seems like it necessitates a bit of diversity and approach, which is something that I'm picking up from some of your approaches. And albeit it, that it's challenging, it almost seems like it's easier to connect with more people because you get to really tap into quite a diverse, like you can post pictures, you can send selfie videos, maybe that wasn't it wasn't impossible outside of remote, but it's definitely been enabled in remote work, which I think is also quite interesting.
I've never thought of it like that. I love that you're seeing a silver lining to it, and I suppose you're right. Like when I lived in Cape Town, would I have sent a Monday video? Probably not. Which is kind of weird because I wasn't seeing everybody every day, like at all, but I still wouldn't have done it. So I hear what you're saying completely, and as I say, I love the optimism. I love the fact that you can actually see a positive in this because that's great. So yeah, I think from that perspective, maybe it has. I want to be really clear though, like remote, I don't think a fully remote business is a good thing. I don't think it's good for humans. I don't think it's good for people. Like I want to be really clear about that. Like we're working very hard to make it as not shit as possible.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think given the choice, be with people, right? Maybe not every day. I don't like being with people all the time, but I love being with people some of the time, right? And it's lonely. Like it's lonely. Sometimes I go sit in a coffee shop just to be around people. I don't talk to anyone. I'm just like, I just need to be around people for an hour or two, and then I've had enough, and then I go home. So I want to be really clear. Like, given the chance and given the choice, NONA would not be 100% remote business. We would still be super remote friendly. We would still be structured in such a way that we don't need to be together, that we could work fully remotely, but we would hugely encourage physical contact. That sounds dodgy, but human interaction, right?
Got you.
Because it's not. I don't believe it's right. I don't believe that given the choice, we should be fully remote businesses. I think given the choice, we should be incredibly remote supportive, even if it's 3/4 of your time spent remote. But we should have that option and that ability to connect whenever we can in a physical domain. And I guess we're going to see what happens in the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months, whatever. We're going to see what happens with the world when and if we can go back to remote working. Like we're going to see the damage that it's doing psychologically and to mental health and to businesses and to dynamics. And it's going to be very interesting, to say the least.
What has been the single most impactful lesson? And I think you've probably alluded to this throughout the conversation, but just to sort of tie a little neat bow at the end. What has been the single most impactful lesson that you've learned about remote leadership in your sort of time as a remote leader?
It's at the risk of repetition. Earlier on in the show, I said that sort of the biggest learning had been when you think you're communicating enough, triple it and you're probably there. But I would dig in a little bit further and just say that it is that, but reaching out one-on-one to every single person in your business often, it has a profound effect on people. And I just didn't think people cared that much. We aren't a very hierarchical business. It's not like I'm the CEO and therefore I'm put on a pedestal, not at all. We hire developers. I'm not a developer, which means there's no respect for my technical talent, right? I'm not the guru that all the developers go to, not at all. In fact, I'm quite sort of not inspirational to a lot of these kind of people because I'm not the person that they're trying to become in their professional careers. And it's important that that's understood because there's no pedestals here. So when I started reaching out one-on-one, I thought people are going to be why is Mike calling me? And every single time, bar literally one single human being who's very honest, and he just said, I don't mind it, but it does nothing for me, which I respect. Literally bar one person, every time I reach out one-on-one, literally every time, there's always a very honest and sincere just saying, Mike, this is so cool. Just having a one-on-one with you. It's really great. Thank you. Please, can we do it more? And that's a big learning for me because it's got nothing to do with, I don't think it's got anything to do with the role. It's just got to do with people feeling special when other people take the time to acknowledge them, especially in a leadership position, right? Just I hear you, I see you, I'm listening to you. I know you're there. I'm here. That narrative, right? That's been a really big learning to me, and it's important for people. It's very important for people. And, it's been a good reminder to me, because this last quarter, I haven't been great with it. And this has been a good reignition for me, because I'm going to double down on it and get back on it.
Yeah. Very cool, Mike. Thanks so much for sharing your insights and experience with this. I think a lot of people can relate to a lot of the stuff you've said. I also think it's very interesting that, just comparing it to our experience, most of our team is in Cape Town. Our CEO is in Cape Town. We have a few people remote, but you're obviously the leader, and you're like the exception. Most of your team is in roughly the same city. So I think that's also an interesting perspective to have. But I really do appreciate you giving some time, giving some of your time and sharing that in the trenches experience.
Really a pleasure. I think one last thing I want to share before I jump off is
Hit it.
I have got an exceptional bunch of business partners. You've had Ed and Dave on the show. They are exceptional human beings. Saskia on our leadership team, Jared on the leadership team. There's not a chance that I would be able to do what I do from here without them. And I want to be really clear about this. If I was the sole leader of the business and I was doing everything, there is no chance I would do this. So maybe my biggest lesson is not about communication. It's actually just find amazing people to run businesses with, and it'll be easier.
Yeah. So shout out to all your co-leaders as well, because I think that's also
everyone at
good
NONA,
to acknowledge.
It's just amazing people.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me, Jamira.